It's a shocking escalation of the belligerence that China has employed nearly non-stop over the last 60 days since the big standoff began on the Doklam plateau in Bhutan. This is China's latest dare that you're going to see now as part of this big afternoon news break here on India Today. China has now issued a direct video warning with a government-appointed newspaper editor speaking into the camera, and you're going to hear his voice in just a minute, in an act of shameful warmongering by this Chinese newspaper editor. The Global Times editor-in-chief, Hu Jin, has warned India of war if Indian troops do not immediately vacate the Doklam standoff point. Says there will be war if the Indian forces stay. And this is an editor who has not only warned of war, but also insulted the Indian government, Prime Minister Modi, and the Indian public in a 70-second video that has been tailored to insult, intimidate, and to threaten conflict. Take a look at this big news break right here on India Today.
For nearly 2 months now, this is the only language China has spoken. The language of war, firepower and intimidation. As the tense standoff in Doklam nears the 60-day mark, China's shocking warmongering and belligerence has stunned the world, even as India keeps its cool and prepares for an eventuality. But things have just escalated to another level altogether. This man on your screen is the editor-in-chief of China's state-owned Global Times newspaper. And after weeks of shamefully publishing vicious threats to India, this man has now decided to do it himself, directly. What you have just heard from this man's smiling face is the first Chinese government-sanctioned threat of military action against India if our troops do not vacate from Bhutan's Doklam plateau. He doesn't stop there. This man then goes on to insult the Indian government and Indian citizens. And finally, the ultimate use of history to threaten a devastating invasion by the Chinese. Every single one of this Chinese editor's words delivered with an insidious smile, as though war is a laughing matter. The ironic threat issued with politeness of a drawing room diplomat. As the tense Doklam standoff marches towards its 2-month mark and no sign of a climb down, it doesn't appear that China has anything but war on its mind anymore. The question is, who will make the next move? With Anand Krishnan in Beijing, Bureau Report, India Today.
And joining me live now to make sense of this fresh act of belligerence from China. Because remember, ladies and gentlemen, there is the Chinese government, there's the state-owned media. It's very difficult to separate them anymore because these are government-sanctioned videos and editorials by newspapers that are run to the last T-point by the Chinese government. So let's not pretend that this is the free press speaking. These are government-owned. This is like China's Doordarshan that is talking to India in effect. Joining me live now, Executive Editor, India Today magazine, Sandeep Unithan, who's been tracking and observing the story very, very closely. Our Foreign Affairs Editor, Geeta Mohan, also with us, one of India's best-known military and security affairs analysts, General G.D. Bakshi. Sandeep, to you first. You know, for the last 2 months, we've been talking about the psychological operations, the mind games of the Chinese. Sandeep, what do you make of this? Because this is an unsettling video. You know, this is a man who you can't separate from the Chinese government. His salary is paid for by the Chinese government. This is a newspaper that's owned by the Chinese government. And it is an insulting, intimidating and threatening message. So far, they were showing you videos of, exercises and firepower demonstrations. Now it's a man speaking into the camera, Sandeep.
That's right, Shiv. What we've been seeing over the last 50 days, ever since the standoff began, is a very long-running propaganda soap opera, if I can call it that. And as you correctly identified it, these are all state-owned media outlets. China does not have a free press. And we have experts here who've actually told us, who've been monitoring this volume of propaganda that's been emanating from Beijing. And between June 26th and the 1st of August, there have been 126 articles in the English Chinese media outlets. And there have been 130 articles in the Chinese, language papers. So, I mean, this tells you the kind of, the volume of propaganda. It's like nearly 300 articles, all on Doklam, painting India as the aggressor, trying to get us to vacate the territory, building up psychological pressure, telling the Chinese people that China is in the right and India is in the wrong. This all points to a very large propaganda campaign that the Chinese have kind of conceived and hope to get India, to buckle under.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's no question that mind games are being played to a very, very extreme degree. The question is, does the Indian government react or simply do what it's always been doing over the last 60 days? Geeta Mohan, our foreign affairs editor, is also with us. Geeta, this is provocative to the extreme. One could dismiss it as media, but like Sandeep said, these are state-owned media. All of this is messaging that has been endorsed, approved, probably planted by the Chinese government directly anyway. Has the Indian government reacted, or is it likely? Take us through the thought process of a message that basically says Team Modi and the Modi government is being misled by the Indian security forces that a military conflict is not possible, Geeta.
Well, that's right, Shiv. The statement that Hu Xijin, and anybody who knows China knows that these state-owned media organizations and their editors-in-chief, in this case Hu Xijin, are very close to the state administration. We're not just talking about the Communist Party, but also to the PLA. And Hu Xijin is one such person who is absolutely one knows how the administration works, and anything that he does is with a clear of the government of China. Having said that, Ministry of External Affairs has been maintaining that they are not going to respond to editorials appearing in private media. But there is a realization that this is messaging from the Chinese side, and anything that's coming from that end has to be taken very seriously. Although the Indian Ministry of External Affairs, Shiv, wants to continue maintaining that exchange and dialogue is the only way forward, the fact of the matter is that this provocation and all the kind of statements that we're seeing on a daily basis, not once but twice over on some days from the Chinese side, is only because this time around China is considering India an aggressor, and India continues to maintain that it's only respecting the bilateral agreement that it has with Bhutan.
Absolutely. General G.D. Bakshi is also with us. General Bakshi, how should India react to this kind of messaging, or should India react at all? I mean, this is a state-owned newspaper from China basically saying that the public is being misled by the army, the public is being fooled by the Modi government, and that war is a definite possibility if you people don't start to behave. General Bakshi, what is our reaction to this?
Look, the simple fact is, whatever China's Global Times says, up till now, we have not seen any matching troop movements by the Chinese, which would indicate the imminence of hostilities. However, if China wants to play this rough, the simple fact is the Siliguri corridor is a core issue. It is non-negotiable. No Indian government can ever afford to retreat from this delicate position. The simple fact is we cannot allow the integrity of our east-west communications going through the narrow chicken's neck of the Siliguri corridor, which is just 17 kilometers wide, to be threatened. If China builds a class 40 road, it has only 3 kilometers left to complete, and it will allow it to bring in the medium guns, the heavy guns, onto the Doklam plateau and shell our rail and road corridors that pass through the Siliguri bottleneck. No Indian government can afford this, and there is no question of the Indian military standing down
Okay,
on
no
this
question of
very vital national
Okay, no question of the Indian military standing down. What about the strategic advantages that we currently have? Gaurav Sawant, our executive editor, put this graphic together that gives you a sense of where things stand in that area should military conflict actually break out. Here's that exclusive report from Gaurav Sawant.
In the eastern sector, in Arunachal Pradesh and Sikkim, India has an edge over China, both in terms of numbers and terrain. Overall too, India is well provided for in terms of troops and equipment. China will need to send at least 9 times more soldiers to be able to dislodge the Indian army. I will tell you more about this in just a moment, but let's for a moment just talk about the middle sector and the western sector. In a moment, I want to bring in India Today's Shudhi Ranjan Sen for more on this story. Shudhi Ranjan Sen got us this story. Also joining us on the broadcast is General Bikram Singh, former Chief of the Army Staff. Shudhi, bring us details. This is the thinking of the Indian Army. You've accessed their thinking. Bring us details.
Well, to begin with, I mean, with General Bikram Singh being on the show, he would know much better because he would have, been part of this entire exercise. But broadly, without giving out too much of details, what we have been told is that the entire sector, whether it is the eastern sector, the middle sector, or even your western sector, that is the Ladakh sector, except a couple of sectors, say the Depsang Plains or the Chumur area, we have an overwhelming superiority. And as you were saying, the number, we have done this gaming and where we look at, what could be the possibilities that China would do, what will be our reaction, how do we respond. In that, what we are getting to understand is because unlike China, we hold on to the heights, our troops are sitting on the heights, and whereas Chinese troops are positioned much, much inside of their territory, we have an advantage. To dislodge our soldiers, they would have to send, depending on the sector, at least 9 and in some sectors 12 soldiers to dislodge 1 Indian soldier. That is the kind of superiority you're talking about.
Sandeep, let's try and, put up some specifics on the table at a time when, specifics are the one thing that are totally elusive at this time. Do we have clarity, Sandeep, on when this is going to end, how it's going to end? Because like you and I, we've been reporting on this story. There couldn't be a greater disparity in the tone and tonality of the two voices of these two countries on this issue that's been festering, and we're soon going to be hitting the 2-month mark now. How much longer, Sandeep?
Shiv, you have to look at the Chinese Communist Party's calendar to understand what's going on in Doklam. Because in November, you have the 19th Communist Party conference, where President Xi Jinping hopes to get another term. And Doklam has come at a very embarrassing point of time for him when he's actually making a very strong pitch to be China's undisputed leader. And there are clear clear indications right now that the conflict is unlikely to be resolved before this party congress in November. And we are in for the long haul, and winter sets in around that time, in October or November. So actually, this propaganda offensive from China actually betrays a sense of desperation that they're trying to get us out as quickly as possible so that Xi can declare victory at the party congress in November. So they have actually painted themselves into a corner with this simply because they completely misread our resolve on the ground. They actually thought that the Indian army wouldn't stand up for Bhutan. They would actually withdraw, and they would do what they did in the past, which is to issue a statement and let things be and allow China to build the road. But I think our very strong position on the ground has taken them completely by surprise, and they're fumbling, which is why now they're going in for this kind of propaganda offensive. And every single day we're seeing the statements that are coming out, the tone and tenor of this we've not seen from Beijing in definitely not in the last 20 years.
Absolutely. Sandeep, stay with me for a moment. Geeta, that's a very interesting point that Sandeep makes. And you, Geeta, you interact with diplomats, ambassadors from all over the world, not just the Chinese, not the Americans, but all over the world, based here in Delhi. Is that a sense that you're getting when you speak to them as well? That, you've got this neighborhood bully that's painted itself into a corner, and they've totally underestimated or misread India's resolve on the ground. The security forces, Sushma Swaraj, Ajit Doval, of course, the Prime Minister's office as well, the entire security system sitting, with absolute resolve, refusing to actually back down from the situation, and China has been caught off guard. Is that the sense you're getting, Geeta?
Well, absolutely, Shiv. I will agree with Sandeep on that front, that yes, the Chinese have really been cornered on this one. But we do know that the statements are not coming just from China, from Beijing. The Deputy Chief of Mission of the Chinese Embassy here in New Delhi also came out with the same statements, same warnings and same threats, also reminding India of the war of 62. But having said that, when in our interactions with various other diplomats from various other countries, they have rather taken very nicely to what India has done in terms of India's response, saying that India has acted very responsibly. The reticence that India has shown in the statements or the responses to the Chinese official briefings, as also the kind of editorials that they are seeing, is a responsible one.
Yes.
That India is not trying to up the ante, but is trying to engage China. But a very important point that they make, most of the diplomats from various European and Western countries, as also Southeast Asian countries, Shiv, they say that it is China who's trying to change the narrative, as they're doing in the South China Sea,
yes,
and not playing by the international rules and order, that India should India should stand up to, which is what India is doing, and it's been highly appreciated by these countries.
Absolutely. General G.D. Bakshi, there is a saying that those who don't know war or understand war and never experienced war speak most easily about war. You, General Bakshi, have seen war, you've seen combat, you've seen conflict. What is the message that the general public should take from China speaking so easily about military conflict and war? Is this a country that can afford a war right now? I'm not talking about us. What about China? Can they afford a conflict right now?
Look, I'd just like to point out as a combat soldier that the Chinese army that hit us in 62 was combat hardened. They had fought 30 years civil war, 3 years in Korea, 8 years against the Khampas. We were a peacetime army then, and we paid for it, especially because of the kind of political leadership that we got. But between 1962 and 2017, over 50 years of waters have flown down the Brahmaputra.
Yes.
The Chinese would be highly mistaken if they think they can get a second walkover. They have not fought a war now for the last 38 years.
Yes.
The boot is on the opposite leg. And their army has become largely a theoretical force.
Yes.
We have dealt with them, and let me assure you that if they needlessly push for a conflict, they could get a bloody nose. The Indian Military Review, the magazine that I edit, has carried out an exhaustive war game to try and ascertain what would be the outcome of such a conflict. What form could it take if China suddenly experiences a loss of face?
Yes.
And if push comes to shove, what would happen? And I'm afraid the conclusions that we have come to, a team of experienced generals,
yes,
admirals and air marshals, it would not enthuse China very much. China may get quite a few rude shocks. An army, a sword that is not used, rusts. The Chinese army has gathered rust for the last 38 years.
Okay.
They may
that's a very important point that you make, General Bakshi. You're saying the boot is now on the other foot. China is now the inexperienced army. The Indian military has gotten all the experience it needs to actually execute a military confrontation, you're saying. Let's just, before we end this show, we've gotten all sides. Before we end this show, I want for our viewers to listen in once again to this fresh video threat from the top newspaper editor in China, paid for by the Chinese government. Take a look.
If Indian forces continue to hang around on Chinese soil, that's something completely different. New Delhi isn't preparing for the worst. If Indian security authorities want to trick the entire Modi administration, I think war will be hard to avoid. In 1962, the Nehru government was confident that China wouldn't strike. India is as naive now as it was back then. What a curious country.
Well, the India-China standoff continues to be one of our top focuses here on India Today. General G.D. Bakshi, Geeta Mohan, Sandeep, thanks very much for joining me on this discussion. We'll keep a track of that story.